believes Israel is engaging in indiscriminate bombing, wouldn't there be an obligation from the U.S. to put new conditions on military aid?
As I said earlier, we're not going to assess every single airstrike here from this particular podium. That wouldn't be appropriate. The Israelis should speak to their operations, but we have every expectation, as I said to my previous answer there, that they will act in accordance with the law of armed conflict and do everything that they can to match their intent, which is to minimize civilian casualties.
But if they aren't, then isn't there an obligation for the U.S. to change the way that it's delivering military aid?
That's a hypothetical that I'm not prepared to engage in right now.
It's not hypothetical if he's saying indiscriminate bombing.
That's a hypothetical I'm not going to engage in.
No.
You're being asked these questions because the president has a tendency to say things about foreign policy and leave them hanging, and we don't get to ask him to clarify himself, so apologies if this gets pedantic for people listening. But did he misspeak yesterday when he said that Israel was carrying out indiscriminate attacks?
You had the opportunity to hear him yesterday on foreign policy when he stood next to the president of Ukraine. So I take issue. I'll take issue with the premise of that question. But the president speaks for American foreign policy. The president speaks and has spoken, Ed, about our concerns over civilian casualties in Gaza and about urging our Israeli counterparts to be more careful and more deliberate.
You just said he speaks for foreign policy, and he said yesterday that there were indiscriminate attacks, which to the rest of the world is a war crime. So why isn't the United States not saying that that's what
the president was speaking to his concerns about making sure we're seeing the results that Israel has claimed is their intent, which is to reduce civilian casualties. That's what he's talking about.
Does President Biden want Bibi Netanyahu to get rid of hardliners in his government?
Not dictating terms to the Israelis one way or the other.
What did he mean yesterday when he said he wanted Netanyahu to change? Was he talking about getting more aid in? Was he talking about more surgical strikes? Was he talking about hardliners? What was he referring to?
Go on, say something clever.
The president has, of course, been very candid about some of the concerns that we had about like judicial reform in the country and where the cabinet was going on certain issues.
Unreal. Unreal.
And he expressed those concerns as a real friend of Israel, somebody who loves and respects Israel and has for his whole public life, that we want to see Israel, whatever they decide to do, to move forward with the broadest consensus possible. And it's in that spirit that he's talking about it.
John, I'm sorry. It seems that, this interaction between you and my colleagues, it seems that, to me, the president is making some pretty clear signals to the Netanyahu government, but it seems like you're trying to walk it back. I mean, I don't know if that's correct or not, so please walk me through it. Is the military strikes, military campaign by Israel, is it surgical or indiscriminate according to the administration at this point?
As I've said a whole bunch of times since I've been up here, we're not going to armchair quarterback this from this particular podium. Let me finish. We're not gonna characterize every airstrike. We're not going to speak for Israeli military operations. The president was reflecting a concern that we have had for some time and will continue to have as this military operation proceeds about the need for reducing civilian harm and being as precise and careful and deliberate as possible.
Now, what you got to say about that?
When he's talking about particularly singling out the hardliners in the Israeli government, what does he mean by that? What signal is he sending out?
I think I've already answered that question. I mean, for many months now, well before the attacks of October 7th, the president talked about some of our concerns over some of the reforms that this new government was pursuing. And he did it out of respect and a true affection for the Israeli democracy and the Israeli people. And that's the context here.
I love you, I love you, I love you!
But obviously, it's up to the Israeli people to determine who their government is, of course.
Sure, and just to recap, what I understand from the president's remarks on Tuesday is that he seems to be laying out some sort of clues as to what he sees the vision towards a two-state solution and what are the necessary stepping stones or the required elements. And I think, the moderate Israeli coalition might be one of them. Another one seems to me, as I read it, a more empowered Palestinian Authority. Is my understanding correct? And if so, what would the U.S. administration do to support that?
The president doesn't have to lay out clues about the two-state solution. He believes in it, and he's been advocating it now for many, many years, certainly since becoming president of the United States. He still believes that there's a promise there, a vision there, a possibility of a two-state solution. And to do that, to achieve it, and again, I'm not saying anything he hasn't said, in order to get there, you got to have leadership. You got to have leadership on both sides. And both sides have got to be willing not only to lead, but to complement compromise and to be willing to come to the table and move that forward. Now, he's also said
Yes.
that with respect to Gaza, whatever governance in Gaza looks like, it can't look like what it did on the 6th of October. With Hamas in charge, it's got to be representative of the aspirations of the Palestinian people. And that means it's going to require some leadership and some change in the Palestinian Authority.
You know nothing, Jones.
One last one, I promise. When you say that the U.S. requires Israel and all other allies to obey requirements of the law of armed conflict when they're using U.S. weapons, how can you ensure that when the administration has bypassed congressional oversight on this, debate on this, and also internal State Department debate on this?
We have a normal process for providing aid and assistance to foreign countries, Ukraine and to Israel, and that's all done within the normal standard consultative process.
I guess indiscriminate, just by definition, means without discrimination. It means not deliberate, not careful. I'm just wondering, and I think my colleagues are trying to get at this, why insist that the intent is there to minimize civilian casualties when the president himself said yesterday that Israel is bombing indiscriminately?
Sometimes in war, and again, I'm not speaking for the Israelis, sometimes in war, your best plans, your best execution of those plans doesn't always go the way you want it to go, doesn't always go the way you expect it to go. We know that from bitter experience in our own military. No matter how precise and targeted we tried to be in Iraq and Afghanistan, there were times when we caused civilian casualties as well.
What are you saying?
And we caused civilian casualties as well. That's one of the reasons, MJ, that we sent a couple of military advisors over there, some senior generals who had experience in that kind of urban warfare, to talk to the Israelis before they moved into Gaza, to help them learn from our own mistakes. So sometimes in war, the best laid plans just don't get executed exactly the way you want, and unfortunately, civilian casualties result.
So you're saying they are trying their best
I'm saying,
to
as I've
minimize civilian casualties, but in practice, that is not what you are seeing happen?
I'm saying that there is a clear intent by the Israelis, an intent that they have admitted to publicly, that they are doing everything they can to reduce civilian casualties. I'm saying, and I have said earlier, that we are seeing them act on that intent in positive ways, and I just went through a couple of details on that.
Oh my God.
Airstrikes, for instance, have reduced since they've started to move more towards the south. They have relied less and less on airstrikes and more on ground troops, which allows you to be more precise. So they have taken measures to act on that intent. But as I said in my opening statement, results really count, and we're still seeing some civilian casualties. So we're still going to talk to them about doing everything they can to reduce that.
So you're saying both things are happening. In some ways, they are acting on their intent to be more careful, be more deliberate, but on the other hand, they are still bombing indiscriminately.
We know they have the intent. We know they're acting on the intent. Civilian casualties continue to happen. And again, we're going to keep urging them to reduce those.